goal number 9 and the jersey number 9 for you today.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Brings back great memories.
Bill Barber is a name that's common to many a Philadelphia Flyers fan, being an ice hockey forward who had a stint of 12 seasons for the Philadelphia Flyers in the NHL. Throughout this whole period, he made sure to leave a mark in the best way possible, winning 2 Stanley Cups for the Flyers in 2 successive seasons in '74 and '75. It was forming a part of the famous LCB, Leach, Clark, Barber lineup that would launch the Flyers to NHL success in the '70s. The games that the trio played made the team one to look for, no matter who was on the other end of the ring. Despite being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, there are several questions that Bill Barber faced from fans of the game. Many deemed his play style as one that was too aggressive, even for a game like ice hockey where injuries are commonplace. His plays were a part of the era of Broad Street bullies, where such aggressive moves had become commonplace during games and were a dime a dozen. This resulted in calls from several players and stakeholders in the sport for this new and aggressive form of play to be regulated by the league. Despite this uproar over their playing style, the LCB trio remains famed in the league for leading the Flyers to victory. These would eventually materialize in the form of 2 Stanley Cups in '74 and '75. Bill Barber, born in 1952 in Callander, Ontario, on July 11, 1952, had a family that always valued the game of hockey. Barber's father was the one who introduced his son to the game. All men in the Barber household were devout players of the game, which they played for recreation. As per the recollections of Bill Barber, his father reminded him of the essentials of the game, all while never making him forget that the game should be fun no matter how he was playing it. This emphasis on hockey in his childhood would not just be a fad, as Barber's father ensured that his children had everything they needed to play the game, from proper equipment to even building a practice rink in their backyard so that the Barber children could practice their game in a proper environment. The Barber children were a group of kids who truly got the proper treatment when it came to being trained for the sport. Bill Barber would have a junior career of stardom as well when he played for the Kitchener Rangers and started to make a name for himself professionally on the field. For Bill Barber, it was from this moment on that he would start getting recognition, not just on the field, but also off of it as the teams in the NHL started noticing him. This would eventually lay the groundwork for his eventual drafting into the NHL. Bill Barber was drafted in 1972 for the Flyers, and in just his first season, he would make a mark on the field with an impressive 30 goals and 34 assists. This would make him a contender for the Calder Trophy of Rookie of the Year and ensure that he was a name to be looked for, not just by rivals and management, but by ordinary fans of the game as well. Bill Barber would stay with the Flyers for over 12 seasons, but his best performance would come in the '75 to '76 season, where he demonstrated exceptional ability and scored 50 goals and 62 assists in just a single season, won the highest score rates for that season. Barber's famed plays would not just be limited to the NHL, as he would demonstrate his capacity for the Canadian team too. For the '76 Canada Cup, Bill Barber would score for the Canadian team in the final against Czechoslovakia, sending the game into overdrive and making way for a final win for Team Canada. This famed play of his would secure his name amongst fans of Canadian ice hockey everywhere, especially since the tournament would crown the greatest team in ice hockey. Bill Barber was in the Flyers team when they were the giants of the game, especially in the '79-80 season, where they had a record 35-game streak, where the Flyers remained an unbeaten team in every way and form. Bill Barber would later go on to captain the Flyers as well in the '81-82 seasons. His expertise in the game and on the field was being recognized. Bill Barber was now a name that people aspired to be if they had not already. Bill Barber would retire from the game after the '84-85 season, when reconstructive knee surgery made him unable to return to the game. His injury unfortunately ensured that he would not be able to come back to play the game as he did before. Bill Barber would be recognized after the league inducted him into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1990, thus making his achievements immortal for everyone to see. Bill Barber might have left the game as an active player, but he never truly could distance himself from the sport. After his stint at the Flyers, he coached the Hershey Bears and later the Flyers as an assistant coach, and then the Phantoms, whom he would help win their first Calder Cup. The choices and career of Bill Barber were clearly laying dividends for him, as teams that came to him only ended up making a name for themselves by coaching. Barber would later become the director of player personnel for the Tampa Bay Lightning from 2002 to 2008. This would be followed by a return to the Flyers in 2008, where he would be named as a scouting consultant, a position that he holds to this day. Throughout their career, Bill Barber showcased determination and grit that would get him out of even the most demanding of situations. It was his teamwork with the other star players on the Flyers, especially the famous LCB formation of the era, that would win him the game, ensuring that his team would walk away not just winning the game, but for the 74 and 75 seasons, they would walk away with the Stanley Cup trophies as well, making a name for themselves. Most of the questions that were raised against Bill Barber were over the reasons that have been mentioned above, where he was not deemed a well-endowed enough player compared to the other players who were in the Hockey Hall of Fame. They argued that he did not score 500 career goals and played in the shadows of other greats at the time, like Bobby Clarke and Bernie Parent. This argument was further augmented by the perception that Bill Barber's career saw him taking off due to his association with Clarke and Leach, without whom his career would have barely gone on to make as much of an impact as he would have in his career. These arguments would be primarily used against Bill Barber whenever it was mentioned that he should be given a spot in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Despite all of these naysayers, he would eventually end up in the Hall of Fame in the 90s. Yet despite all of this, Bill Barber has ardent defenders that attest to his ability to serve as the model, all-around left-winger in the league, and more than worthy of being in the Hall. They attest to his consistency, that he never missed a game or practice and always prioritized his team above himself. A role that might not win one of the blessings of being a star player, but that dutifully served the team, earning them multiple Stanley Cups. Bill Barber was not as much of an offensive player as others in his role, such as Richard Martin or Steve Shutt, but his priorities and focus always remained in defense. This would, of course, mean that he did not draw the media attention that others of the LCB lineup did, but it still showed a dedication to the team that he was playing for. The game that Bill Barber played had defense being just as important as offense, perhaps even more so. When forming a wall against your opponents showed them how little leverage they held against your home team, players like Bill Barber showed his opponents exactly this and ensured that the Flyers would not let anyone through. Bill Barber played the game like a sniper, where his speed and strength would push him right up in the middle of the opposing team, where he could do the most damage, after which he could then do the most damage for the Flyers, using his sniping ability to get in quickly. With these skills and agility, many players would try to go at things alone and try to make a name for themselves. But Bill Barber was never one for such pageantry. His ability to hand the puck over to his teammates showed a devotion to the team that coaches wish for in many of their star players. Bill Barber was a player loved by all of his coaches, Fred Shiro, Bob McCammon, and Pat Quinn. For coaches, Bill Barber was a dream. He played as the coaches demanded. He missed games and was always the most consistent one at practice. All of these habits combined to make Bill Barber the ideal team player. This no doubt affected his stats in the game, but for him, the team winning was everything rather than his glory. When Bill Barber stepped onto the field, everyone from his coaches to the team knew that he would produce results. Bill Barber was one of those once-in-generation players that could not be reproduced, because the sheer mixture of selflessness and determination is not really found in players today. Couple this with his pairing in the LCB trio, and the Flyers knew what they had on their hands and were sure to use this pairing all the way to the Stanley Cup. One of the other allegations that has long managed to stick by Bill Barber was those of him pioneering diving in the league. Diving, or rather when players try to deceive referees by embellishing fouls and impeding the progress of forecheckers, is a practice that has now become rampant in their game. Many attribute this to Bill Barber, where he was the one who initially popularized this in the game in his days as a player of the Flyers. Seeing as to the success he gained with it, other players soon started to follow the tactic, and eventually it was common practice for player to five in order to get the benefits of doing so. The tactic, while useful on the field, has long been criticized, both by players and authorities, as it can be deceptive in the game. It is not considered a test of any skill on the field, or even a sign of good sportsmanship. Lying and deceiving referees to gain a free penalty was something that brought down the standard of the game rather than bringing it up, and has evoked consistent backlash, to the point where the league had to devise new rules against diving to make sure that no one could use this tactic to their advantage again. Many name this sudden proliferation of diving on Barber, who popularized it during his plays, but for him, he was just doing what would be considered best for his team at the moment. Sure, he used a dirty trick in order to get an advantage, but in the long term, his methods worked, with the Flyers winning Stanley Cups both in '74 and '75. These methods popularized by Barber simply show the determination and grit he had, and the lengths that he would go to just to prove himself not just on the field, but off of it as well. The hockey that Bill Barber represents is perhaps the most raw and unfiltered style of the game that can be seen anywhere, whether it's live on the field or an ice hockey field. It was the kind of game where aggressive plays were encouraged, even rewarded, and players did everything that they could to win, one where the team matters more than individual glory. This kind of play is seldom seen today, much less heard about, yet the appreciation that Bill Barber has gotten, not only for his plays, but for every moment of his career for playing as such, shows that people still recognize this style and yearn for a return to it. Bill Barber may have been the player with the least fame in the LCBN, which overshadowed his playing skills. He may have been a part of a team that would dominate the 70s seasons at its peak, but it was due to these things that Bill Barber was a player who always put his team above himself. This showed when he was made to lead the Flyers in the 80s and played a role as a senior player in the team, where the entire team looked upon him for inspiration. For sure, Bill Barber had more than his fair share of moments where he was deemed to be out of order, and these have come to be called out during his career. Especially his rough style of play and his constant diving that made his moments in the game be looked at less than favorably in the decades since. Yet in the end, no player has a perfect playing style, and this is exactly what makes this game exciting. Even the most seasoned of players will have faults.